All right, so this is DBQ Document 4, and this is actually about the song Yankee Doodle. So I'm sure many of us grew up singing the song Yankee Doodle, probably in a kindergarten or first grade music class, and we probably didn't think too much about it. And I gave you two links for this, and here on this first one we can see the lyrics that we're probably familiar with. Yankee Doodle came to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. And that doesn't seem to make much sense, but actually there's a lot packed into that um, little stanza of music there. And one of the things in the NPR link that the guy mentions, and he's a librarian, he's a researcher, he's an author who wrote a collection of nursery rhyme history. So he obviously has some credible knowledge here. One of the things he mentioned is that the song was different than a lot of songs that we hear today, where somebody writes it and somebody produces it and somebody records it, and then it is their song. And if you want to re-record it or if you want to parody it or something like that, you have to get permission. But that's not really the way that music worked back then. Basically, you came up with a tune and then everybody put their own lyrics on it. And that's exactly what happened with this song, Yankee Doodle. And he likens it to being remixed back and forth like dance music today. Um, and to draw another comparison, in a lot of ways, Yankee Doodle was actually what we would probably know as a diss track nowadays. It was really sung by the British to insult Americans. And so um, he mentions right here, it was sung predominantly by British as a reminder that dance steps in Europe and in America were very different. And make sure you're doing the right steps, right? Yankee Doodle, keep it up. Yankee Doodle Dandy, mind the music and the step. So he's saying, like, make sure you're keeping the right beat, the right rhythm. Make sure you're doing those dance moves right, because us cultured Europeans, we know how to do that, but you Americans, in a lot of ways, they kind of thought of Americans as rough around the edges and maybe less sophisticated, perhaps even less intelligent. And so that's really what they were saying right there. To switch it over, we're pretty familiar with the term Yankee. I mean, we have the New York Yankees, the famous baseball team, um, today, and we hear that term Yankee. As a matter of fact, the U.S. men's national soccer team even goes by the nickname the Yanks or the Yankees. So that's a pretty common term for just an American today, or in maybe even more specifically, like a northeastern kind of North Atlantic American. But a lot of foreigners will just use the term Yankees to mean Americans. But back then, it was considered kind of an insulting term. And so a Yankee Doodle would have even been more insulting, like you're lowly, or in this case, they use the word provincial, meaning you just don't have a whole lot. You're kind of, poor, perhaps. Um, and then a dandy is a meticulously well-dressed man. So putting all of those things together, they're disparaging Americans or insulting Americans by calling them Yankees and doodles, like that's kind of like a way of saying you're stupid or you're simple. And then they're saying but well dressed. They're not actually saying well dressed. They're really saying you were trying to be well dressed, right? Like as much as you could afford to be or pretend to be. And then so the line that we get stuck on, and it seems nonsensical, is stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. So what they really mean, macaroni would have been somebody who, and it was specifically a group of Englishmen who dressed in a more Italian sort of way. So it was very flamboyant and very, think like frilly collars and fluffed sleeves and things like that. Very gaudy almost. Um, and that's what they were kind of making fun of. Like, oh, well, you just stuck a feather in your hat and you think that somehow is somehow like making you look fancy. It's not. It was considering they were trying to insult Americans by saying you can't just stick a feather in your hat and then think you're well dressed. And so the Americans are hearing these songs, they're hearing the mockery, and what they actually wind up doing is taking the song and kind of embracing it like embracing the insult of it and making it, right here it says they sang it proudly in battles against the British and with extra exuberance when Lord Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown in 1781. So the Battle of Yorktown essentially ended the Revolutionary War. For all intents and purposes, that was the final battle of the Revolutionary War. And so instead of singing some song of American pride, they actually sang this song that was supposed to be insulting to Americans. They kind of reclaimed the song and said, "Oh, well, you thought you were making fun of us. Well, we're just going to own it." And so, kind of a pretty profound transformation there. Um, and so that you kind of get an idea for how the British felt about Americans. They kind of thought of Americans as lowly, as poor, as unsophisticated, as uh, you know, well, you think you're sophisticated, like you think you know something, but you don't actually know anything. Um, and Americans just said, "All right, well, fine, well, we'll just own this." So that is document number 4.